All right. Welcome, Melanie. Can you introduce yourself, your name, what you do, and what you like to do for adventure?
Sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Melanie Paget Powers. I am the owner of Mel Edits. It's a freelance writing and editing company, business, whatever. Excuse me. Um, what do I like to do for adventure? So, I used to say I'm outdoorsy, but I don't know if that's so true anymore. I like to travel and I do a lot of solo traveling. Even now that I'm married, I still do a lot of traveling by myself. I started in my 20s backpacking through Europe on my own with my Eurail, staying in youth hostels, meeting people from all over the world, and got completely hooked on it after college and changed my whole journey. I moved back in with my parents to work at my hometown paper so I could earn more money to get back to Europe because that's all I cared about. I so-called moved to Europe at one point, but I only stayed about 4 months because I ran out of money and was traveling too much and not working. So I've Europe is my place. I go a lot. And then as I've gotten older and made a little more money, I've gone other places. I went to India and Sri Lanka a few years ago. In 2018, I went to Guatemala to do a 3-week Spanish immersion course. I'd always wanted to improve my Spanish, which, I was learned in high school and
Yeah.
college. And yeah, I went down by myself and found a teacher and improved my Spanish. And so I'm always thinking of different types of adventures in that way. I like small hikes. I'm not a big outdoorsy person in that way. That's my husband. We have very different taste of adventure, which is partly why I still do it by myself because we take vacations together, but he goes some places by himself and I go some places by myself. Would rather do that. We're very independent in that way and we still get to do what we love that way.
That's awesome. Yeah. You get to do the things that you actually want to do and just get
Yeah.
dragged along to all these other things. It's hard too, because you only get so much. I mean, you can give yourself as much time off as you want if you work for yourself, technically, but financially, as you learned, you can't actually really do that.
Right.
So it makes sense to maximize your time and your budget.
Yeah, and it's, half the fun is planning and dreaming of the trips, right? And going on them is an entirely different type of adventure, but planning them and thinking about where you want to go next is fun all year round.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. How did you get into solo travel? I feel like I was really scared of solo travel at first, and then when I realized that you can't just wait around for someone to do it with you because no one's ever gonna do it with you if you don't
Yeah.
just go. I ended up doing it, but it's kind of scary at first. How'd you end up getting into it?
It's funny. It's kind of like how I got into freelancing. It's just like had to happen because of the situation I was in. So I was in college and I'm going to date myself, but I was in college in the 90s and I'm from Indiana. And when I grew up, no one I knew went to Europe. It just wasn't. The only people I knew that went to Europe were the French teacher and the Spanish teacher at the high school, right? And occasionally they'd take a group of kids. And I went to college and I always thought I'd go to Europe one day, you think when I'm old and I have money. And
Mm.
I went to college and people were studying abroad and I didn't really want to do that because I was on this journalism track. But then I heard about friends of who'd graduated, friends of friends who'd graduated, and they went to Europe by themselves or with groups, of friends. And I thought, wait, we can go to Europe in our 20s? I mean, I had really no idea. It just wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
In the where I grew up in a small town with parents who were school teachers, and so I started hearing about these stories and gathering information, and I bought a Let's Go book of Europe
Hell yeah.
and started reading it. And I earned a little money through some extra scholarships, and we got paid a little bit on the newspaper staff. And I just, scrimped and saved all my money. And I didn't have friends that had money.
Mhm.
I had friends that were a lot of first generation college students, and they just wouldn't have been able to go to Europe at that time. I also was very introverted, but also very confident. And, I was already going to movies by myself and going out to eat by myself and spending a lot of time by myself and was fine with that. So I thought, well, I'll just go to Europe by myself. And I don't know how my parents didn't have heart attacks when I look back on it. I mean, kudos to them. They were always incredibly supportive. This is before email, even that
Yeah.
we all had email. And I planned out this trip after college. I left like 3 days after college, I thought I had enough money for 5 weeks. At that time, Let's Go recommended $50 a day. Yeah,
Wow. I
exactly.
wish.
I know. Isn't that amazing? That's not including your Euro pass, but that's like youth hostel and food. And
Wow.
so and that was pretty good for the most part, except in some cities. And so I mean, the minute I landed in London, I was just like, this is incredible. I love everything about it. I did, of course, I got homesick at times and lonely at times and scared at times. But I was just hooked.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I look back at that high school kid, and I just never thought it was possible. And and I went, and I really liked being by myself, because when you're by yourself, you meet everybody else, right? From
Right. It makes you
all
make
over the
friends.
world. Yeah, you
Yeah.
have to talk to people, and it forced me to talk to people that I wouldn't have otherwise.
That's so cool. I
Yeah.
love that. It's really interesting. I was actually driving around the other day. I I feel like I'm sort of chronically having FOMO, like fear of missing out. Like I'm just always thinking about like I could be doing this, I could be in this place. And maybe that's like the storyteller in me as well, just like seeing all these other lives and sort of like picturing how things would pan out if I made different decisions. Not in a way that's like sad or bad or like I love my life. I am so lucky and privileged to be where I am. I love my house, love my neighborhood, I love my boyfriend, I love my cats, I love what I do. But I still think about like, oh, but what if we like went to Portugal next year? Or like, what if we went to the Alps to go skiing for my birthday next year instead of like going to Vermont? Like, what if we did that? There's so many places you can go and things that you can do. And I'm just like constantly thinking about it. I just can't stop. I feel like this is maybe relatable to
Yeah.
a lot of our listeners. But that is so funny because when I was in high school or like even elementary school, middle school, when you're thinking about your future, you don't really see any of that. You just see where you are. You're just present in like where you live. Like I didn't really use the internet that much in high school. It's not like it is now where there's like social media everywhere. It was very much like you're in this place and you'll leave when you go to college. And that's when you'll learn things. But in high school, you're so present. And sometimes I think back and I wonder, like, what would it be like to just be that present and to just be where I am and to just not know anything else that's going on? It's such an interesting dichotomy. And we just sort of hold those two lives inside of us forever. But do you have this like chronically thinking about where else you could be and what else you could be doing and like planning trips and things like that in your mind?
I don't as much anymore, and thankfully, it's exhausting, right? When I was in my 20s, that's all I did. Like I worked in my newspaper job in my hometown where I had interns, so I knew them really well, and they basically were great. They were great to me. They were like, "You have a home here whenever." So I would quit my job, go to Europe for 4 months, come back, get my job back, move back in with my parents, and but I was constantly wanting to be there, and it was such a privilege. I recognize that. But there's also, people don't talk about that downside of I wasn't settled. I was always, what is next and where could I go? And I don't want to be here. And I want to make the friends that I have made in Europe. I want to make them here at home. And I'm not going to do that in my tiny little Indiana town. And I was always itching to go somewhere else and always thinking about it and reading we had lots of guidebooks, every guidebook. And then when blogs came out, I was reading everybody else's travel blogs. And even when I moved to DC, I was working here in DC and I still felt that. I actually was living in DC for 2 years and then left to go to Europe. And at that point I moved to Europe, but that was the idea. And I went to Prague and I got my teaching English as a foreign language certificate.
Yeah.
Which I never used really, only as a volunteer because I just kept traveling instead of getting a job. And then I was gone for about a year by the time I visited a bunch of places and visited my parents and came back and worked. And anyway, I was gone from DC for about a year. And when I came back to DC, so this is in my 30s, I had this feeling of like, oh, I could make it work here. I bought a couch for the first time.
Oh, I know that feeling.
I bought a real bed because I'd had my like twin bed from high school. I bought my own bed. I just had I wanted anything that I could pack up easily and store in my grandpa's garage.
Yeah. I always used to rent people's guest rooms because they're always furnished. and there's no like formal lease when you rent somebody's guest
Yeah,
room,
you
so you
can
can
go
leave whenever
any
you
minute.
want.
Yep.
Exactly. Everything fit in my Prius. And yeah, 2 years ago, I was like, I don't know. I just had been doing full-time travel to an extreme by myself. And I just got so lonely at one point. I was just like, van life's cool and all, but like, I just want to go home. And I moved back to the town I was living in before I started doing van life in North Carolina and like bought a mattress. I was like, this is it. It's happening. It was only a $300 mattress from Amazon, but
still, it's adulthood. You
is.
can't carry that mattress around with you on your back.
Right. It's not gonna fit in my car.
No.
That's like when it's sort
Yeah.
of time. I don't obsess about being other places as much anymore, but I like having a home base, because at some point you realize it doesn't matter how introverted you are, you're gonna want like a friend or two.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to make friends when you're constantly traveling.
Yeah.
And like you can have those friends, but then they're virtual. It's just not the same as hanging out, and you can't always rely on them or contact them. And it takes like 1.5 to 2 years, I've learned, to like truly make a friend. The best way to make a friend, if you're in your 20s and 30s, is to find someone who has a routine that you also like. So for example, I just made a new friend. She likes to go to hot yoga. I also like to go to hot yoga. She goes on Wednesdays. We now carpool every Wednesday to hot yoga. And now she's my friend. We like hung out on a Saturday. And I was like, we're friends now. It's official. And I sometimes used to wonder, like, at what point do you get to say that you're friends?
Yeah.
And it seems so crazy to think about, but I know I am not the only person thinking about this.
No, and it can be really hard, especially if you go to college, and when you get back from college, you're like, wait, my friends in college were all the people that just lived next to me, and and we hung out. Think of all the times you just hung out. People, when you're an adult, you're like, hey, do you want to just like hang out with me? No, weirdo. I don't know you yet,
Totally. I'm like, do you want to just like go to the post office and the grocery store together? Or
Right.
Yeah. It's so interesting how like when you grow up, you just, I don't know, you just start to change and realize your values change, I think is what it really is, and your priorities change. That's very normal.
But you can still keep all that travel in there as well.
Yeah. It's hard too, because like I don't have the energy I did when I was younger.
No.
I don't want to travel full time right now. I don't want to live out of a suitcase or the back of a car. I would like my ergonomic desk chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Same.
How did you end up going from journalism into what you do now with editing?
Yeah. So I started out as a newspaper reporter for small community papers. That's what I really liked. I did a daily for like 4 months. And it was a disaster. I mean, the place was a disaster, and I was like, nope.
I think they all are.
Oh gosh.
The dailies.
Yeah, it was awful. It's just churn.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to move to DC. I knew there were a lot of journalism style jobs here. I wanted a social life. I wanted more money and a 9 to 5. My best friend had already moved to DC. Plus, I'd been here, and I just loved the vibe of being where the news is. And so I got to DC, and I landed a job at a health association. It was public health. I didn't know what public health was. I didn't know what an association was. Luckily, my soon-to-be editor boss really wanted someone with journalism background. And she said, I can teach you what public health is. I can't teach you how to be a journalist. And we went journalists it was a monthly newspaper, and I was assistant editor of the monthly newspaper then. And I loved it. I really liked writing for members of associations and being able to use my journalism skills on issues that I cared about. So I was writing public health, but I was writing all the news style articles and feature articles and doing reporting and all of that. At that time, I was taking photos and designing the paper as well.
Cool.
And I just worked my way up at associations, and mostly healthcare, and until I was an editor of magazines. And then about 10 years ago, I was in a job that I hated. It had changed. A lot had changed. My boss had left. The CEO had changed. There was just a lot of things I didn't like. And I was so desperate to just do anything. And I was applying for jobs and not really seeing what I liked. And I didn't want to talk about meeting friends. I had only been at this place. I had left and gone back. This is a theme.
Classic.
Yeah. And when I went back, I'd been there 2 years. I'd been at the previous job 2 years. And I thought, God, I don't want another job where I have to make friends, because jobs are, you may think you love the job, but it's all about the management,
It's all
right?
about who you're working with.
And the people, it's all about the people. And I thought, what if I get there and I just don't click with people? And I want to be friends with, and I just like work friends. I want to enjoy seeing these people every day.
Yeah.
And so I just didn't want to do it all again. And so I had no grand plans to become a freelancer, but it was really that I hated the job and I wasn't finding anything I looked for. And I was really at the age too where I was sick of people telling me what to do. I realized some people were idiots. They didn't know any better than I did. And why are they higher level than me? People just leave me alone and let me do my job. I'd be fine. And so, I just went out on my own. So I'm very lucky that I didn't really have any fear because I was so desperate.
Yeah.
And I also had a huge network in DC of association people because I'd lived here for so long. So that really launched it for me.
Yeah.
And no looking back.
Did you just get clients by like email cold pitching people when you first started?
Some of that. And I should say, I do writing and editing. Now it's really for membership associations. In the beginning, I did a little bit other kinds of content marketing. I pitched a little and then realized I didn't like doing that. But the thing I did was I just emailed. In the beginning, I emailed virtually everyone I knew and said, this is what I'm doing. Happy to help out. These are the services I'm providing. And I got a lot of, former colleagues at other places saying, hey, we need a writer for this, or can you come cover our conference for our blog? And then I did some of the, online job boards, and people were asking at that time for people on freelancers on Twitter, and I just, did a lot of different, just tried a lot of different things until I got really lucky that it got to the place where it was referrals. And most of my work is referrals now.
I feel like that's when you've sort of made it, is like when you're the past year and a half. Every time I go to get new clients because something's winding down and I don't want to have a gap in my schedule and I'm like freaking out about money or something, so I get a referral. It's amazing. I haven't had to pound the pavement in well over a year and it feels so good. I still do because I'm scared. Like I still like network and ask who works with freelancers and add to my follow-up list in case I do need to get clients, because I'll never stop doing that. But it's pretty incredible, and I just feel so much less stress about my business having so many referrals and like getting to the point where you just know something's going to come your way, and being able to trust in like whatever system you set up for your client acquisition as well, and like the network that you've built for yourself too,
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like it's easy because I did a lot of work to get to this point, as you did, right? To get to referrals. But it really is the point when I need more work, I will reach out to first my favorite clients and say, do you have a writing assignment, or do you need help with this, or do you need help with that? And I always get something. And, I see sometimes this backlash kind of on LinkedIn where it's like, people just say it's so easy. Just ask your clients for work and they give you work. And I'm like, yeah, but there's all this stuff before that, right? Like I'm really good to work with. I deliver great content, and, I keep in touch. I keep my website updated. There's all these things.
You're also not working with clients who are constantly like struggling. Like if you worked with tiny startups when you first started, you can't go back to those and ask for work if they don't exist anymore. Like my entire first like 2 or 3 years of freelancing, there was maybe one client I could go back to and ask for work, because every company I had worked for before that got to a point where they were struggling. I was working for coding boot camps, and it's just like not a future-proofed business model. Like it just is getting drowned out by foreign workers. So, and the cost and all of these things. So it wasn't going to work that way. And I was always skeptical of those posts as well. And now I'm at the point where I'm working for like Fortune 500 companies and companies with $50 million, $200 million of funding. And they can afford when I come back and say, hey, I have availability. Do you have any projects? Like that's way different too.
Yeah, it's such a great point that, you might have to change your services or niche or how you're looking at things if you want to provide services to a certain area and that industry doesn't have any money. Like that's fine if you want to, if you can afford that and that's what you want, that's great. But I think sometimes we don't sort of evaluate, yeah, what the market is doing all the time.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of hard to tell from the outside too, sometimes, you know?
Mhm.
I mean, you can look on Crunchbase and you can look at these places that show valuations and funding and things like that, but
Mhm.
you don't always know what that means. Like even
No.
I look at it and I use it to inform my decisions, but I still don't necessarily, it's not an answer to any of my questions. It's just
Yeah.
like a clue.
It's almost like, and this is not helpful, but it's almost like a vibe, right? Like when
Hmm.
people are talking about like the last year or so, like freelancing is weird, clients are disappearing, it's this vibe, right?
Yeah.
And we can't point to just one particular industry where it's happening. And so you just kind of have to be aware of that. And the key is to try not to panic. And that's
Yeah.
really hard.
And be agile, like be able to
Yeah.
make changes and constantly, I mean, I don't want to say constantly because that sounds like really exhausting, but like a couple times a year, check on your business, what it's doing, how you're doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Like this past quarter, I think I stopped using like 3 different tools for my business and picked up one extra tool. And those things, like those little changes, I do for a reason because it'll save me money or I'm not using it anymore. Or like I changed a little bit the way that I reach my ideal client. Like I used to be doing like career and productivity software as a service marketing. Well, now I'm writing about small businesses for a Fortune 500 tech company that's not that, and I like this and I kind of want to keep doing more things like this. So I'm like slowly changing my niche a little bit, but it's malleable. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
business tech is always going to be that. But you can sort of find these little pockets within it to help your ideal clients find you by
Mm-hmm.
getting even more specific if you want to. And you don't have to let it like corner you either.
Yeah, it's so important to be able to one, evaluate your business and not just do status quo every day, to really step back and try to look at it objectively and what's working, what's not. Like you did, these tools, I don't need to pay for these tools anymore. But this other tool would be really helpful. And then the other thing is just and diversify,
Yeah.
right? Like I do so many different things and it's not, I mean, you have to do things that you love because if you don't love it, you're not going to want to do it, you're not going to want to get clients, so
You
don't
burn
just
out.
go after, yeah, don't go
Yeah.
after, like I never would want to be a tech writer and do what you
Yeah.
do, and there's money in it, but that's not what I do. I didn't choose healthcare because there's money in it. I chose it because I liked it and I kind of fell into it.
Mhm.
But I also, in my niche, I say, I have a niche of membership associations, I have one of healthcare, I also do membership associations that have nothing to do with healthcare. But then in my services, like I'm a managing editor, I'm a writer, I'm a proofreader, I'm a copy editor. And I like doing all of those things. I did social media management in the beginning of my freelance career and I didn't like it. I didn't like keeping up with it. I like doing management. I didn't like doing strategy, but clients need a strategy if they're going to do effective management.
Yeah.
And so I dropped it, so
Yeah.
it ebbs and flows and you can do whatever you want. You can change it. It sounds so obvious, but I had this realization at one point in my freelance business that like, oh, I could change what I do.
Yeah.
I can do whatever I want. I can create a new thing. I could try new things. And that was very different from that employee mindset.
Yeah, totally. I think it's really easy to get stuck and wondering like how are people going to perceive me if I change this, or how do I even change, or making it feel like it's a bigger, like making a mountain out of a molehill, really.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can still like take on content writing clients while you're, pushing to get clients for a different service. Like I just literally today decided, I've been thinking about this for a while, but I was just waiting for someone to ask me to do it because I don't want to go get the clients for it at this point because I'm already doing legwork in a system to get like other clients. But so I've been thinking about doing LinkedIn ghostwriting for a long time because I love being on LinkedIn. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but
We've
I just
noticed.
thought that like this would be profitable and it's fun for me. And someone just reached out to me yesterday and asked if I would be willing to like talk to them about doing it for them. And I was like, heck yeah. And it's an agency, so I could just
Very
take
cool.
on a few clients as long as they're willing to pay my rate. But I didn't like overcomplicate it this time offering a new service. I was just like, okay, let's put together the package so we're ready when someone asks. And then I was about to start doing the marketing for it, and then I got someone came to me, which is great. But like, it doesn't have to be super complex as long as you have like a sample of this. Once you get that first client in that new service, add them to your portfolio and then keep moving on, and you will be fine. It's not as hard or complicated as it feels like it is, as long as you're educating yourself enough and practicing enough at the beginning, or offering a low enough rate that you're not like scamming somebody.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, we think we have to set up this whole process and come up with all the rates ahead of time, and then it has to be on my website and I have to advertise it and have to ask, and you're right, you don't have to do all that. It reminds me, I had somebody on my podcast recently, Lewis Tinsley, and he does a lot of corporate photography. He also does headshots, but that's not his passion, but there can be money in it, right? So he doesn't even advertise that he does headshots. It's all referral, it's all word of mouth, and he can make some good money doing it, but that's not what I don't even know if he puts it on his website. I mean, there's probably headshots on there, but I was like, that's just so interesting. Like, you don't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
And the work is coming in, and, he can focus on promoting other things. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. As long as you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
And you're doing it for a long enough period of time, you will get referrals eventually.
Yeah.
It just takes time and reputation. I think also, like, I always tell people, don't advertise the things that you don't want to do. Right. If you're like willing to take it on, take it. But, my headline says that I'm a freelance content writer, but I also like will build an entire website for you if you really want me to and you're a small business. But I don't advertise that. Yeah. And if someone comes to me, it's usually like a friend of a friend who has a small business and they just started or something. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll make you a one-page website. Why not?
Yeah.
Because I used to make websites as a freelancer, like for a living, and I just realized it's such a big undertaking. I didn't enjoy it. Stopped offering it, went back to the things that I know and love and are simple, like email marketing. It's funny too, because I say these things. I'm like, oh yeah, the things I know and love and are simple, like email marketing. And then other people talk about email marketing and they're like, it's so complicated and hard. Why do you think it's easy? We all have our strengths, and it's helpful to play to them.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. The fact that you think it's simple, you enjoy doing it, but so many people don't think it's simple, and they need you, right? I've been a journalist for so long now that I'm just like, oh, feature story, yeah. And people say, how do you make such good money, charging by word? I'm like, I'm really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked at a daily. I learned how to write and do interviews. I don't over-report. I don't do hour interviews when I need 20 minutes. I can sit down and write all day on a Sunday, and it's just it's easy to me. But that's what they're paying for is almost 30 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like I wasn't like this straight out of college, right? It was a lot of years and a lot of experience.
Yeah. I talked on your podcast last week, and we mentioned the whole comparison trap that we can sometimes get stuck in, where you want to compare yourself to people who are successful and doing what you're doing, but then at the end of the day, you don't necessarily realize, like, I didn't realize how long you've been doing this for, right? And like, you didn't realize how long I'd been building like my resource library. Like, I've been building it for 4 years and it's massive. And it looks like so exciting and great. And like, how do you get the energy to do that? It's like, actually, I just worked on it like an hour a week for 4 years. It wasn't a big thing, but you can't compare your day 1 to someone's day 100 or your day 100 to someone's day 2000, right? Like, it's just completely different. And it's hard to know what's going on behind the scenes. That's kind of why I love doing the podcast too, is because you really get to like ask anything you want, peel back the curtain, So how did you end up deciding to start your podcast? And what, actually, why don't you tell everybody about your podcast first?
Sure.
Because probably some people don't know you have one.
Sure, of course. I have 2. I'll mention the one you're talking about is Deliberate Freelancer. I started it in 2019, so we're hitting over 5 years now, which is amazing. Wow. It's really it's a podcast for any freelancer in any industry at any level. It's about the business side. It's about how to build a sustainable business that you love, get away from that hustle, get away from that feast or famine cycle as much as we can. I'll just briefly say my other podcast is Association Station. It's a seasonal one that is geared toward membership association. So that's a lead generation one that I created a couple of years ago. But Deliberate Freelancer. So I really got into listening to podcasts like most people, probably with Serial back in 2016 or so. Started finding other podcasts, really just love the format. And it's quite interesting too, as someone who writes all day. But someone was telling me the other day, well, of course you like audio because it's a creative outlet for you. Like, I'm never going to write a blog long term because I write all day for other people. I don't want to write for myself. So it's something different. And I just really got into it. And then I started thinking, well, I'd been freelancing at that point for about like 2017, 4 or 5 years freelancing. And I found that a lot of people were asking me a lot of questions online or when I would see them at conferences. And it was the same type of business related questions of how did I do this? How did I do that? And I gave some conference presentations at writers and editors conferences. And I really enjoy giving back and telling people how to not be an employee and if that's what they want. And so that kind of was happening at the same time I was falling in love with podcasting. So I started dreaming about creating my own podcast. I came up with the name out of the blue. So I had this name, Deliberate Freelancer, for a while. And I went to a podcast movement conference in 2018, I believe. Got really inspired there. I sat around for about a year before I did the podcast because I was really intimidated. Again, this is back in like 2018 about the tech. I didn't know, like, how am I going to do this? I don't want to sign up, submit it. You had to submit it to Apple. And that was a longer process back then. And how am I going to find a podcast hosting company? I don't want to do all that. You
used to have to pay to host your podcast.
Yeah. It's all these things. And I just didn't want to figure it all out. And I also didn't want to edit my own. I didn't want to learn how to do editing. And I wanted to sound professional without me having to spend hours learning and still not being professional. And so I found this little podcast company that had a launch package and I just paid them. I invested and said, listen, I'm a content person. I've got all the content. I know exactly what I want to do. I've been listening to podcasts for a couple of years. I just need someone to help me launch the thing. And it's been amazing. The reason I keep doing it, and it sounds kind of hokey, but it really is because of the feedback. If no one was telling me, hey, I did this thing that your guest recommended, or you said I should do this, so I tried it and I got new clients. And also I try to make it a mix of tactical and inspirational. I really am everyone's cheerleader. Like, I want you to succeed. I want you to learn how to get over your money hangups and your fears about raising your price. And I want you to set boundaries and I want you to stop that scope creep. And so I try to be this very gentle, big sister helping people figure these things out through what I've learned, but also I have a lot of great guests on the show.
Yeah, it's awesome. I like that you do solo casts as well as interviews. It's a nice mix. I want to do more solo casts. I don't know. It's like the one thing that gets kicked down the road that takes time. So true.
It takes time. Yeah, because you have to have, it's funny. I come up with the ideas, like I come up with the headlines of the podcast, right?
Yeah.
And then of the episodes. And then I'm like, oh, but now I have to like actually create the content for this. And I scripted out just the ideas. And that too could take, for a solo episode, it could take me 4 hours to kind of, script out something that has stories in it and tactical advice. And so yeah, it does. Interviews are a lot easier.
Yeah. That's
especially
why we're here.
Especially because I'm a reporter, so I'm interview people all the time. So.
Yeah, and it sort of holds you accountable too, because like you have to show up for them.
They're on the schedule. Yeah.
So it's different. I really like asking people about their money mindset and their finances and like how you're able to do your business the way that you are, how you're able to travel the amount that you do. I know you're a scrimper and a saver, but I'd love to hear more about maybe like your progression throughout your freelance part of your career with your pricing and how you're able to like set aside money for travel as well.
Yeah, I will say, a lot of this comes so much from what we saw and observed and learned as a child. And I am, again, very lucky. I had a great childhood, and my dad, both my parents were high school teachers. They're retired. They're still around. They're just retired. But my dad taught social studies, and the two classes that he loved to teach and the two he taught the most were government and economics. And so we learned economics at home. He taught me how to balance a checkbook, and I saw how my parents could, as public school teachers, save money to get what they wanted and they were really poor before they became teachers. They got married very young, had me very young, went to college together. We all went to college together. So they knew what it was like to have scrimp and save and be on food stamps and have 3 jobs. And then once they became teachers, they were both just really good with money. They didn't throw money around for things that they didn't spend money if they didn't have the money to spend. And I just was very lucky that I saw that example and learned from that. And I don't have a ton of hangups about money. And that is just pure luck of who my parents were and that they did a good job, because I know a lot of people don't have that situation. But now as an adult, yeah, I have increased my prices obviously over 10 years. And I'll say, I had a business coach. I hired a business coach when I first started freelancing, and I thought I wanted her to teach me how to pitch because I thought I was going to pitch magazines, which I ended up not doing. But we got into this conversation of money, and at the time, and I live in DC, a very expensive area.
Yeah.
I am married, but I am the primary breadwinner. We don't have kids, but I basically pay for everything because of my husband's very small business and part-time Montessori teaching job. So he brings in health insurance, luckily, and I pay for pretty much everything. So I have to make money. But I had, I think I had this Midwestern nice problem where she was saying, how much do you want? I said, oh, I think I'll do $75 an hour. And she's like, that's too low for DC and your level of experience. What if you did 100? And I was like, oh, I don't know. What if they say no? She's like, are they really going to yell at you? Are they going to say, no, we're never going to pay that? And she's like, we had to talk through some of those issues that I had about, being nice and wanting people to like me.
People pleasing.
Yeah. And, so that was quite interesting. And then I was very lucky, like I said, from the beginning to have a lot of great clients. I made almost 6 figures. I haven't tracked it as much from the beginning. I now consistently make over 6 figures.
That's amazing. Yeah.
But it fluctuates, and it has been, it was really stressful in 2020 when I lost a ton of work and I still had to pay our bills, and I had to figure out how to come up with new work. And that kind of lingered into 2021. Like my motions of that lingered into 2021, which actually was my highest year, probably because I worked too much.
Yeah.
Finally kind of back on an even keel. But as I learned to charge project rates, not hourly, charge my worth, charge what the client can handle, corporate versus nonprofit versus startup, I take all of these things into account, the value of whatever the product is that they're getting. Is it a white paper that's going to bring them in a bunch of money, or is it a simple blog post? All of these things I take into consideration as and I have sort of what I call my secret hourly rate that I'm trying to earn, but I just come up with project rates, and I come up with rates that I feel comfortable with and that I can negotiate down a little bit if need be and still be comfortable with them. Rates that I'm not going to resent the client, resent myself for taking them on. If it takes a little, and if it takes a little extra work, well, I'm getting paid really well, so that's fine. And so I just, I didn't do this in the beginning. But I eventually I have a business checking account and a personal checking account. And then I created some savings accounts through my Discover card online, and you can name them, and that's been very effective for me. I have a tax fund that I consider that, the money that I put in at the end of each month, that's for taxes. It's not my money. I can't even pretend it's my money. It goes into the tax fund. Don't touch it. And then I have, I'll say like European vacation fund. And so naming them has been fun and at the end of every month to just keep putting more and more money in those as much as I can. But I'm very lucky. I always wanted to get to the place where I'm comfortable with money and I can, like, our dryer broke a couple weeks ago and I was able to buy a new washer and dryer
Wow. Yeah.
and just not stress about it. And, and my parents were like that because but I've seen plenty of, they got to that place, right? And I've seen plenty of other people where, I mean, if an appliance breaks, that's stressful. They don't have the money. What are they going to do? They put on a credit card. It's just, I just don't want to have to stress about money. And so I think most of the time, I've gotten to that point where I'm pretty comfortable about it. I don't have to stress over every little thing.
Yeah, yeah. I really admire that. I didn't I grew up like sort of opposite, well, not opposite of you, but my parents also were not financially well off. And I don't want to say they were necessarily financially irresponsible, but they hated working for other people. So they were always like trying to make their own business work, but sometimes it didn't work. And then like financially, you're as a family, like a young family, they had 2 kids by the time they were my age and owned a house that was falling apart. Like, what? I cannot even imagine that.
Yeah.
Like I was never taught how to save. I was never taught about credit. I didn't even know what a credit card was. My parents did not have credit cards because they were afraid of them. And then when I got older, I got my first credit card and I put all my emergencies on it because I didn't have an emergency fund. And now I'm paying 25% interest for 5 years on something that I shouldn't have done. Right. You know what I mean? But you can't. Right. You live and you learn. Yeah. It's very unfortunate, but there's just so many things that I think it's good that you acknowledge your money story, regardless of whether your parents taught you how to save like you did or where my parents did not. And like money was more communal in our household. Like a lot of the money I earned when I was younger, my parents, we used as a family. But the nice thing is now they fix my car for me for free because they own a car repair shop. Right. So like, well, it really evens out. I feel like they got the short end of the stick here at this point. But it's really important to like know what your money story is and how it might be affecting you, because like you being a people pleaser from the Midwest was affecting your rates. And while your parents taught you how to save and be responsible with money, it doesn't matter at the end of the day if you're not getting paid enough, right? And so it's kind of interesting to see everybody's different money stories will affect your business somehow. I think it's so important to like actually pay attention to them and see what they are. I have like a money mindset workbook for this specifically, and it has very little to do with your present. It's mostly questions about your past and how you think about money and why you think about money. Like, do you think it's hard to earn money? Do you think you have to work hard to get money? Or do you think getting money can be easy? And like all these questions that I've been asked by business coaches and come to the realization like, oh, wow, this is affecting me. And I just had no idea that it was.
Yeah, my parents were not entrepreneurs. And even beyond that, as public school teachers, their salary was set. They they could not negotiate as public school teachers. And interestingly, too, because they went in at the same time, they made exactly the same amount of money. So my mom as a woman didn't make less because where they worked. But again, they never had to negotiate or could negotiate. So that is a side I never saw. Right. Yeah. So we all have these differences of things. It's funny how much your childhood still affects you.
It follows you forever. Yeah. Yeah, it's insane. I definitely think that like my parents being entrepreneurs did contribute to the fact that like I'm here doing what I'm doing right now. Like I never had a doubt in my mind that I could run my own business and make enough money to survive. Like I just was like, yeah, obviously you can do that.
Yeah.
It's my parents.
Yeah. My parents were incredibly supportive when I went freelance, but they didn't understand. My dad was like, now, how do you make money? How do you, and then when I was successful, he was so proud. He didn't doubt it. He just didn't understand exactly how it was going to happen and what I was going to do if it didn't happen. And knowing that I had to pay all these bills, and I was a fully grown adult at that point. So
yeah. It's so challenging to explain it to somebody who doesn't really know anything about it either. Because you can, I don't know, there's like 12 different components to having a freelance business. Yeah. Would you like me to show you my course, Father?
Yeah. Have you listened to my podcast, Dad?
Tune in. I know I don't call you enough. That's what they all say. That's great. I did also want to point out, I really appreciated that you shared that your income does still fluctuate, even though you've been freelancing for more than 10 years and you do generally make six figures in a year, your income still fluctuates. And I think that that's true of every freelancer. And there's this like weird thing, especially if you've been employed full time before, where you think at some point it's going to like even out and every month you'll make 10K and that will just be normal. And it's like, actually, that's not really how it works. How do you handle those fluctuations? Is there a way that you manage your money and your expectations for that to because it's going to happen, right?
Right. Yeah, I think cash flow is really important. I got to the point, and not everybody can do this right away, but I think everybody should strive to get to this point where you have money in the bank where, I never complain really about a late payment. If a payment is a couple weeks late, sure, it should be paid on time, but things are going to happen. I've had checks get lost in the mail. I've had people go on vacation. I never stress about it because I don't need that money immediately because I don't have a cash flow problem. So that takes away most of the stress. And then I have an monthly income goal, but I really look at it quarterly. So I look at each quarter and then divide it by 3 to see if I'm hitting my goal, because it definitely fluctuates. And I have certain clients I have a couple of clients where I get paid every other month because of the projects that we do. So in those other months, I'm not getting as much money, but I might get double what I got in February. So the next month. So I really look at it quarterly. And then I track it. I have just a simple Excel. This sounds so basic, but again, I was not doing this in the beginning. I have a simple Excel spreadsheet where I have, not only am I tracking just what I'm doing for clients, like sometimes I have to keep track of a couple different projects, but I have a tab in there. So I have an Excel spreadsheet for every month. So right now I open this month's document. There's a tab for different clients, and then there's a tab that has every month and what work I'm working on that month. Not the money's, it's not going to come in that month because who can track that to the T? So it's just like I can see, if my goal is $15,000 a month is my goal, and I'm at 8,000, I need to line up some more writing projects. Or maybe I made 20,000 last month because I had this annual project I do that's huge. And so maybe I can take it easy. Or maybe I've got a vacation coming up and I need to kind of plan and just make sure I'm okay with that. And sometimes that's fine because I have money in the bank that I can, I don't have to work extra. I have the cash flow and I can take a vacation without having to, work 2 weeks, extra, work extra time before that. So I really like to see it there in black and white on the screen of what my numbers are that month. And then having that money in the bank means I'm not really going to stress about it too much anyway.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's hard to create that cushion initially because the buildup just takes so long.
Yeah.
It feels so the delayed gratification, especially for us youngsters.
Yeah, and I will say too, I am always working. I want more money in my savings right now. Like my savings has gone down because of that. I don't have a cash flow issue, but it has definitely decreased because life happens. I bought a new washer dryer. My cat had to have serious dental surgery earlier this year.
Dude, dental surgery is so expensive for cats.
It's so ridiculous.
I accidentally spent like $9,000 on my cat's teeth.
Oh my God.
Because it just kept adding up because she woke up during surgery. It was a disaster. And it is the most stressful thing you can hear happen to your pet.
Yes, absolutely. I grew up in the 80s where we didn't take our animals to the vet and they didn't know what to do with them when we did. And it is better nowadays, right? We're getting our cats out of pain and protecting them. But oh my God, it's so expensive. So I just want to say, like, I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank at all. But I have a savings. It's a little cushion. I want it to be more. That's probably one thing I do get from my dad that is like, it's never enough. I always feel like, I wonder if I would ever have $100,000 in the bank. Would I feel like that's enough? Like that sounds like a lot of money, but who knows if I would think that's enough or not.
From all of the interviews I've listened to on that podcast, My First Million, I don't think it will ever be enough.
Yeah, that's how we think it will be, and it's not, right? So I
Yeah.
just am at this point, like I said, where I'm like, I don't stress about money. I can replace things when they break. I can go on a vacation because I want to. Like, that's a really healthy place for me
Mhm.
to be at.
Yeah, yeah, that's huge. I hope to get to that point someday. It's such a buildup. And I think that like emergency savings, it's really a double-edged sword. I have to pay off debt and build up my emergency savings.
Yeah, it's
So I'm sort
tough.
of prioritizing the highest interest debt and then a little bit into savings. And it just, it'll all balance out eventually. And those
Yeah.
fluctuations, they're going to happen no matter what. So you just have to prepare for them as best you
Yeah.
can. And don't be too mean to yourself about it, because you can't shame yourself into doing better. That's not a thing.
Yeah, definitely give yourself grace. And, the debt, like there's so much shame related to it, but just blame it on the American, the capitalist system.
Truly.
And I think too, it's good to remind ourselves we don't have to fix it overnight. If you're paying off a debt and you're doing like, it's instead of like feeling anxious and shame and stress about it and doing nothing.
Yes.
Pay off $5, pay off this percent, like just do a little bit that you can, and you'll get there,
Yeah. I spent 2 years just like being afraid of it completely.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not helpful.
And it's so normal, and so many people do it. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of that way with like tax paperwork that I don't want to do, and I just pretend it's not there. And it has to be done.
Yeah. This is life. This is life in the society we currently live in. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. Can you tell people where they can find you online and where they can hear your podcast?
Sure. So the podcast is on all your favorite podcast apps. It's Deliberate Freelancer. It's under D. You can go to deliberateFreelancer.com, which is essentially my website, meledits.com. I'm mostly on LinkedIn nowadays, so you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm sort of sneaking around on Twitter every now and then, kind of on Threads, still feeling out. Oh, also, I have a Deliberate Freelancer Facebook group. I really like it if people listen to the show first and see if you kind of like the feel of the show and you want to learn more. You can join our Facebook group. We have over 400 people in there now, so
wow, that's amazing.
It's a good community to commiserate, ask your pricing questions, anything you want. It's a safe space.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. This was a jam-packed show.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yay.